Well, hello, it's Clive DeCarl here, and I'm super pleased to be joined by Gloria Moss. Now, I've known Gloria for a few years and heard her speak, and I'm always fascinated. But recently, I heard her speak on another podcast, which was just extraordinary, just super interesting information. And so, Gloria's going to enlighten us, starting with one ancient site that I know virtually nothing about. So, I'm really excited. So, thank you so much, Gloria.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Clive. It'd be wonderful to have a conversation.
So,
And what we're going to talk about today is really history. Is it a story? or, or can we believe it? Well, George Orwell famously said that he who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. And how much of our real past has been concealed by the controllers of the present day? That's something that we'll be talking about today. And the French novelist Balzac, through the mouth of one of his characters, said that there are two histories: official history, lying, and then secret history, where you find the real causes of events. So I hope that together we can have a bit of a deep dive into history and perhaps question official history and see whether it's right or not. So shall we get going with ancient history, and then we can move forward in time, perhaps? And I'd love it if we do this as a conversation and you come in and say
yeah.
what you think.
Oh, definitely. You won't be able to keep me away.
Yeah. It'd be much more interesting than just me talking on my own. And so I've been looking at history for many years. And one of the first places I started to look was with a site in modern day Israel called Qumran. And there's some pictures here, so you can have a sense of what this site looks like. And can you see that first slide showing Qumran in a desert area by the Dead Sea? Can you see that picture, Clive?
We can see it on the left, but if you click on it, it should go to a big screen or
Yeah,
something.
okay.
We'll
Let me
scroll
do
down.
that. Yeah.
We're scrolling down, so we can see it.
So it's a very mysterious area. You can feel when you're there that you're out of time completely. But what you're looking at in this picture is the caves that surround this site of Qumran. And it was in these caves that some Bedouins found the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. And, well, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, this site is the most important in the history of modern archaeology. Well, among the most important finds in the history of modern archaeology. And the Israel Historic Museum, in their view, this site represents a turning point in the study of the history of the Jewish people in ancient times. So there's very good reason, ab initio, for us to be interested in this site. Now, the conventional view, official history, if you like, about this historic site is that it was home to a group of religious Jews who basically spent a lot of their time immersing themselves religiously, in the 10 baths. Yeah, you heard that right, 10 baths that are concentrated at the site. Let me just show you where you find this site. You can see a map there of the Dead Sea, and Qumran is the area in the box at the top of that map. So it's the northern end of the Dead Sea, and Jerusalem you can see to the immediate west of Qumran. And and it was easily accessible from Jerusalem, a day or so by horse or donkey. And this is what it looks like. This is one of my photos when I visited. Rather like where you are at the moment, actually, Clive. Palm trees, beautiful palm trees.
Yes.
And this is an aerial view of the site. And what you can see is how the archaeologist who was excavating between 1947 and 1956, that was a French Catholic called Roland de Vaux, V-A-U-X. And he was had a background, a monastic background, and if you like, he projected his thoughts onto this site. How do you know that? Well, you can see from the descriptions of this all-important site. One room was deemed to be the scriptorium, where he thought that these Dead Sea Scrolls had been written. And there was a refectory. Of course, you'd always have one of those, wouldn't you, in a monastic environment. And the baths, he thought those were where the Jews of the day, those were the Essenes, one of the main groups at the time, along with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. This is where, he said, they ritually abluted themselves. And when you walk around this rather small site, all the signage corresponds to those provided by Roland de Vaux, the original archaeologist of the site, who, would you believe it, actually had no background in archaeology at all. The perfect qualification
Yeah.
for excavating one of the world's most important sites.
Who was in control at this time?
Very interesting. You mean politically who was in
Yes.
control? I don't think it was the Israel authorities. There was a period when they were in control, but initially I don't think it was in their control. And so there was a period, there are actually 4 cemeteries in this site. And there was a period when it was under the control of the Palestinian authorities that they could excavate those cemeteries, which they wouldn't have been allowed to do had it been under the control of Israeli authorities. So you've got a Catholic leading this archaeological expedition. And so what official history tells us is that this was home to a group of reclusive Jews who basically prayed all day, abluted themselves in the 10 baths. They were impoverished. They were a small group of no more than 200. That's essentially what official history tells us. They created some scroll jars. They were intended for the deposit of the scrolls. I'll show you pictures of those in a little bit. And they were poor and reclusive, is what official history tells us. The only deviations from that theory have been the view that this site had absolutely nothing to do with the Essenes, that it was a Roman palace, or villa, I should say, a Roman villa that maybe cultivated some herbal substances, such as frankincense. And there's another view from a Professor Kolb, Kolb, that this was, it couldn't be more different a view, that this was actually home to a group of soldiers, that it was a sort of army place. And that's because there's a very important tower at the entrance to the site. So essentially you've got these 3 views. One, that it was home to the Essenes and they were poor and prayed all day. And then the secular view, which divorces the site from the Essenes, that said it was an army depot or a Roman villa. I think we could put on our Sherlock Holmes hat, perhaps, and see if we agree with any of those three, or whether perhaps it's something completely different from those three theories. And well, should we start on our journey of discovery around, the what we find there? Let's begin with some sources. And Josephus, many people will have heard of Josephus as a very reliable source. What he actually says is that the Essenes, this one of the groups of Jews, they study the healing of disease, the roots offering protection, and they study minerals as well. And in fact, 75% of what Josephus says about the Essenes parallels what we can read in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in the caves that you saw, which are very, very close by to the site of Qumran.
But what period?
And not just...
Josephus? What
When
period?
are we looking at? Good question. We're looking at the 1st century AD to 1st century BC.
Right.
So about a 200-year span. 1st century BC, very important period of Jesus, for example. And one of the scrolls talks about the man of righteousness. But scholars have been very quick to disassociate this from Jesus himself. I can say a bit more about that later, maybe. So one source is Josephus, a reliable historian. Another one, which many people who studied Latin at school might have read, is called Pliny, Pliny. And he must have been a really interesting man to meet, because he wrote a natural history in many, many volumes, and he was interested in anything and everything. And he is the man who said that these Essenes lived by the Dead Sea.
Right.
Now, the word Essene, some people say, derives from the Aramaic word Asaya, which means healers. Now, it doesn't matter if people haven't studied Latin and Pliny, but one of the things he says about the Essenes who lived here was that there were large numbers of people who came to visit this site and the Essenes. And that the people who came to visit, I'm just going to say 2 words of Latin, curriculum vitae, which means your journey of life, vitae, AE at the end. The word in the Pliny is that the people who visited this site in thousands were, you might want to make a note of these 2 words, vita, V-I-T-A, and then the next word is phesos, F-E-S-S-O-S, which means tired, exhausted, debilitated. Now, the translation of Pliny that all scholars that I've come across refer to is by a man called Rackham, and he translates vita phesos as tired of life, suggesting that the people who came had a sort of psychological issues rather than physical issues. But that would be vitae, AE, like your curriculum of your life, curriculum vitae, AE. It's not that in the Latin, it's vita, which means by life. So we have to, I think, put Rackham's translation to one side to find what was really going on. The people who were visiting were debilitated by life, which gives a whole new interpretation, I think, of why the people might have been coming. Perhaps they were ill, suffering from illness. And this would tie in with Josephus talking about the Essenes as a group who studied the healing of disease, roots, minerals.
If the place would be full to overflowing today, everybody's tired of life, it would seem, out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is what Rackham said, that the people were tired of life, but actually the Latin is vita with an A at the end. And the meaning of words in Latin, you can infer from the endings of the words. So in the Latin originally, the Pliny, it was vita with an A at the end, which means by life, not of life.
Yes.
So the people arriving were debilitated by life,
Yeah.
i.e., I think they could have been ill. Your business, Clive.
Right.
And before we move on from these sources, original sources, there was one source, a rhetorician, who described the Essenes as having an entire and prosperous city by the Dead Sea. Well, that's really interesting that he described them as having a prosperous existence because, well, official history says that the group who lived here were impoverished. And one of the scrolls, most of the scrolls are on parchment, but one is actually etched onto copper, and not surprisingly, it's called the Copper Scroll. And a lot of scholars have described what's revealed in this scroll as the stuff of fantasy. Why do they say that? Because it records, wait for it, treasure in the area to the value in modern day terms of over £2 billion, between £2 and £3 billion. We're looking at an enormous quantity of gold that's described in the Copper Scroll. Oh, anything between 100 and 165 pounds of gold. And, oh, an imaginable volume of silver, 382,000 pounds of silver. Well, because history has labelled the Essenes as a small and impoverished group, you can see why scholars would say that this is the stuff of fantasy, what's recorded in the Copper Scroll. But we owe it to a British scholar called John Allegro. Some people might know that name. We owe it to him for having opened this scroll and having transcribed and translated it. And he had no doubts that it actually recorded immense treasure in the area around Qumran. And incidentally, John Allegro was on the original Scrolls Committee. He was the only agnostic on that committee. All the others were Catholic, including the excavator of the site, Roland de Vaux. So that's by way of background with the sources. I should also, of course, mention the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves. They refer to the exceptional longevity of the Essenes that lived to 100 years of age. And they put a cap on the age for having official office. And yet, you posed a really interesting question. When was it excavated? I said that the cemeteries were excavated when it was not under Israeli control. And when they actually exhumed the bodies from there were 4 cemeteries, extraordinary number of cemeteries in what's a very small site with a resident population of no more than 200. What they found was that 85% of the skeletons in the cemeteries were from people aged under 40. Does that sound consistent with what the Dead Sea Scrolls tell us? And not only that, but people who analysed the bodies said that they didn't look like Essenes. The bodies were betokened labourers, horsemen, scribes, people of diverse ethnic stock. This wasn't consistent with being the bodies of the Essenes. But let's remember what Pliny said, that thousands of people were coming to this site who were vita thessos, tired by life, or debilitated by life. And not just that. I wonder what you make of this, Clive. all the bodies had madder in their bones. That's liquid madder from the madder plant. And it's a very fast dye, so it couldn't have got there from leaching from the clothes, so it must have been drunk. And actually, Pliny, in his amazing history of the world, he describes madder as a cure for jaundice, sciatica, and paralysis when taken with daily baths. And there are 10 of those baths, and 2 big cisterns feeding those baths. What do you make of this so far?
Wow. Well, it sounds very convincing. And the blue dye, is that, well, what is that, and should we be taking it?
Yes, so is it what official history has told us? Let's continue with our Sherlock Holmes hats on. The amount of water that's flowing through the cisterns and the baths is excess to drinking requirements. And spring waters feed the baths, and they contain selenium. Well, I've read that has anti-carcinogenic properties.
Yeah.
And then there's a nearby spring at a place called Enfeshka, which has amongst the most therapeutic waters in the whole of Israel, with bromide, sodium, magnesium. You were recommending I have that for a back condition I have, Clive.
Well, sea salts are a fantastic, fantastic material.
Really?
Absolutely.
And so what's it beginning to look like? Was this more than just a place for a small community of impoverished Essenes? Let me tell you what else they found, and I'll show you some images. They found, you see on the left there, a juglet. It was in one of the caves, and amazingly, it still had liquid in it. And the researchers who analysed the liquid, they said that it consisted of pulverised date stones.
Wow.
Well, they said, what possible use could that have had? And they said, well, it can't have been pulverised. Just, they set aside what their machines told them and said it can't have been date stones. It must have contained something else. But actually, well, the father of herbal medicine at the time, and for several hundred years his works were consulted, was Dioscorides. And I managed to find a copy. I couldn't find a copy in English, but in the British Library there was one translated into Renaissance French. So I went into the rare books room at the British Library to read Dioscorides and see if he had anything to say about dates. And my goodness, there were pages on dates, Clive.
Wow.
And he said that date stones were good for hemorrhages and female conditions. Well, the people who produced the article on the juglet didn't tell us that. And what about the glass containers that you can see there? Well, there's an interesting story behind these. When Roland de Vaux did his original excavation, he never included these in his inventory. They were excluded from his inventory. I wonder why. And it was only when a professor of archaeology from Belgium was brought in to look again at the inventory that she shocked the world by telling them that these juglets had been found at this site. Why were people shocked? Because they resembled perfume jugs or aromatic jugs called unguentaria, unguents for unguents. And because some of them had very narrow necks, like you can see in the one on the left, they suggested that they may have been containers for extremely valuable herbal products, aromatics. And aromatics at that time had two main uses. One was as perfumes, and guess what the other one was?
Essential
Medicines.
oil.
Yeah, essential oils and medicines. And, well, the minute you start talking about these herbal products, this is where the pounds start ratcheting up. Balsam was worth twice the value of silver at that time. And balsam was a remedy for headaches, cataracts, dimness of vision. Frankincense and myrrh, which there's some evidence that may have been growing near the site, they were also extraordinarily valuable. Not quite as valuable as balsam, but still extremely. I mean, myrrh, a pound of myrrh was equivalent to the value of 8 weeks of labour, a labourer's salary. Frankincense, a pound of frankincense, the value of 2 weeks of a labourer's salary. And they were so valuable. Why? Because they were so efficacious medicinally. So that was revealed by the Belgian archaeologist, Pauline Donsel-Voet, her name is. And then I mentioned the scroll jars. You can see one at the bottom on the right. Official historians tell us that they were made bespoke for the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were found in the caves adjoining the site. Were they made bespoke? Well, I came across a commentator who said that none of the scrolls were actually found inside these jars. And anyway, the scrolls were half the height of these scroll jars. Maybe they weren't built. They weren't created for the scrolls. Maybe they had some other function. What could that have been? Could they have been, they've got an airtight lid, could their function have been to store these precious herbs? And I put on the top right an image of a Renaissance herb jar, which would have filled many a pharmacy in Renaissance times.
Yeah.
Have we been misled? Completely misled. I'll go on to medieval history in a minute, but let me just alert you to a couple of other things. I mentioned the tower that has led scholars to assume this was some kind of military centre. The tower is extraordinary. It has walls that are 4 to 5 feet thick. The rooms communicate with each other, but not externally. And it actually resembles the tower at a site south of Qumran called En-Gedi. You saw the map earlier on, and we can go back to that map.
I've actually been
you
to
can see.
En-Gedi.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, I slept overnight with a girlfriend there. It was right by the pool and the waterfall. It was unreal.
Very beautiful, yes. So can you see En-Gedi? It's sort of slightly north of the word sea to the west.
Yep.
And En-Gedi has a tower very similar to that at Qumran. And one archaeologist called Hirschfeld, he thinks that they were cultivating balsam at En-Gedi. There's a mosaic there. I don't know if you saw this when you were there, Clive.
No, I didn't.
That says, "Don't betray the secrets of the town on pain of death." So, given that balsam was worth twice as much as silver, you might understand why there was this injunction not to share the secret. And not only this about the tower. Sorry, Clive, what were you going to say?
There's a bit of a delay on the line, so I'm cutting in about 3 seconds too late, I can tell.
Yeah.
Balsam, would that have been made from the pine trees or something else?
Yes. Well, it's a balsam bush. And balsam, one of the reasons it was so expensive was that it only grew in 2 parts of the world because it needs special climatic conditions. And one was this part of the world, and Jericho, where King Herod, had balsam orchards.
Wow.
He was very clever to be growing balsam, given its value. And Antony and his lady, Cleopatra, when he conquered this area, he said to Cleopatra, "Which part of my dominions would you like, darling?" And clever cookie that she was, she said, "I'd like Herod's balsam orchards." Because that was that was like having an oil field in terms of its value.
Wow.
So the tower at Qumran, the first floor was finely plastered. So clearly something was being stored there that needed pristine conditions. And there's a kind of, well, they call it a glacis, Glacis, that supports the tower. And it's very similar to the one in En-Gedi, according to this archaeologist, Hirschfeld. And what Hirschfeld said was that the stone glacis that surrounds the tower at En-Gedi provided enhanced thermal insulation to diminish or prevent evaporation. Well, that must be true of Qumran as well. I regret to say that Hirschfeld, who was talking about these precious herbal substances around the Dead Sea, he didn't survive beyond his 50s. He suddenly contracted cancer and died.
Poisoned?
I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that he was revealing the production of these extraordinarily valuable herbal substances which had immense medicinal applications.
There are a couple of blue essential oils I can think of. There's blue tansy, and I think there's also blue chamomile.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder whether those might have been a part of it.
What are they called again?
Blue tansy, Tansy, and blue chamomile.
I haven't come across those. I've just come across balsam, frankincense, and myrrh.
Right, okay.
And I believe that no Greek soldier went into battle without some myrrh in his pocket because it's very good for healing wounds quickly.
I understand that they used very finely powdered silver, which they'd put in cuts if they were damaged, and put silver coins or whatever in a bag and put it into a well if they felt that the conquered lands, if they'd poisoned the wells, they would apparently.
Ah, how interesting. So I just want to say a little bit more about this site before we move on away from it. Do you remember this map? Well, the naming of the different parts of the site. That was all thanks to Roland Devaux. One of the areas he describes as a refectory, and that's a rectangular room. And one of the reasons he called it a refectory was because what was found there, they found a lot of bowls and plates. But, well, I don't know if it really was a dining room because, what do you think? They found 709 bowls, 210 plates, and 100 goblets. Well, does this sound like matching crockery? I don't think so, because the numbers are so different, aren't they? And the plates are only teacup in size, so you couldn't really have had a decent meal on them. And the refectory area has a sloping floor, which I think would be rather uncomfortable to sit on. But what it allowed was water to enter at one end and drain away at the other end. And it actually resembles an area at the very southern end of the Dead Sea called En Bakek, with a Q twice, where drugs were manufactured, trodden and crushed. Could this have been what the so-called refectory was doing? Do you follow?
Yes, quite.
Did you get it completely wrong?
Just an aside, is the water still running there? Are the springs still active?
The springs are still active at Enfeshka, which is the oasis very close by, and it's thought to be an associated site, that they were working together.
Right, right.
And actually, I managed to find the report on the waters at Enfeshka at a museum in I think it was in Jerusalem. That's why I found out the elements that were in the water there. And the scriptorium, you can see that in the middle at the top of that screen you're looking at now. That's where they say these really important Dead Sea Scrolls were written. That's why they called it the scriptorium. Well, what do you think of this? The benches that they say were the tables are no more than 20 inches wide. So they say these benches were tables. This is where the famous scrolls were written. Now, they haven't taken into account the fact that these benches have concave tops. I think it would be very uncomfortable to write on concave tops. And they haven't taken into account the fact that ancient scribes didn't actually use tables. They sat cross-legged with the parchment across their knees. So if it wasn't a scriptorium, what could it have been? With these narrow benches with concave tops. Could this have been a room for patients? Well, there isn't time to go into it today, but famous ancient medical centres could be found, thousands across ancient Greece. They were called Asclepian medical centres, after the man Asclepius, who was elevated to a god. And I compared some of the benches that were found in the Asclepian centre at Corinth, and would you believe it? Those benches were similar width and similar height off the ground to those in this so-called scriptorium. And I'll just finish with one story. We could talk at greater length, but I mentioned the British scholar John Allegro. And he did this wonderful work with the Copper Scroll. In fact, I've read that he was the only member of the Dead Sea Scroll Committee who did actually transcribe and translate the scrolls that he was given. The others just sat on their scrolls. Shocking, though that may sound. And one of the scrolls that John Allegro was given has been given the name 4Q Therapia. He gave it that name, 4Q Therapia. In his translation, from his transcription, he says it describes the rounds, the medical rounds, of a man called Caiaphas. And this fragment appears in a book. Well, that was Allegro published it in 1979. In 1986, a Professor Charlesworth published a copy of this scroll and his own transcription and translation based on Allegro's photograph. And the two translations correlate really closely. And what happened next is extraordinary. A couple of scholars came out and said that this scroll, by this stage, Allegro had died. He died prematurely in his early 60s. I've read he was in very good health at the time. He was writing a book that he said would blow Christianity sky high out of the ground. He died at an early age. So a couple of scholars appeared, and they said that this 4Q Therapia scroll was, well, one said it was nothing more than a practice sheet with random markings, and the other one said it was a piece of old boot, nothing more. And John Allegro wasn't around anymore to defend his original transcription and translation. And that's probably enough to give you a sense of the official history of Qumran and what one might find by doing a little bit of critical thinking. I personally published several articles on the subject. If people would like to cite of some of these articles, I'm very happy to, or supply one anyway. I think I sent a copy to you, Clive, of the most recent one, which I think was dated 2001. And I've given you just some of the evidence, and I would say that this work the research that I've revealed, I think it strongly suggests that the people living at this site were running a health centre, rather miraculous health centre, which was attracting thousands and thousands of visitors. What were they using as the basis for their cures? They were using water, hydrotherapy. They could have taken some of the wonderful minerals that flowed directly into these baths and supplemented them with the extraordinary minerals from the Dead Sea. They were using water. They were very possibly using these extraordinarily expensive, valuable herbal medicines, balsam, frankincense, and myrrh. And since I've done that work, I would say very little attention has been given to this new interpretation. I wonder what you make of that, Clive.
Well, it reminds me that up until fairly recently, the city of Bath in England had the Royal Hospital of Mineral Water, or I can't remember, maybe I got the name slightly wrong, but a whole hospital devoted to mineral water as the therapy. It must have been good. Then there are all the hydrotherapies that used to be around in the UK, all the spa towns. Water was hugely valued and appreciated. And so I find it fascinating. I'd love to do, if you like, a part 2 on Qumran, because if there's more to know, I'd like to know it.
Well, yes, and it's thought that there were other sites around the Dead Sea that the Essenes may have been practicing at as well. For example, we mentioned En Gedi. There's another site halfway between them called En El Gavir. They excavated the bodies there, and guess what? They also had madder in those skeletons.
Wow.
And madder is a member of the quinine family, and that relates to hydroxychloroquine.
Yes.
Which contains quinine.
And methylene blue, because hydroxychloroquine can be taken from methylene blue, which is another blue dye.
Oh, I didn't know that. And on the other side of the Dead Sea, a plant grew called mandrake, which has anesthetic properties. And so, because of the close resemblance, for example, that I mentioned between the scriptorium benches and those at the Asclepian Centre of Corinth, people used to experience this special sleep at the Asclepian centres. They call it the incubation sleep. And nobody's explained what this sleep was. All modern scholars say it was sort of psychosomatic, but actually there are inscriptions talking about the blood that people woke up surrounded by. So I think surgery, they've certainly found surgical instruments at Asclepian centres. Surgery was going on. People were experiencing this special sleep. I think it was induced by anesthesia that was being used surreptitiously. And because of the close resemblance between the centre at Corinth and this one at Qumran, maybe they were doing something similar here. Hence the thousands of people coming here. And their transport would have been, could have been by horseback or by boat, because there are very ornate columns all around the Dead Sea showing that there were ports with quite illustrious visitors coming. But we don't get an inkling of this from official history at all. Why would this be covered up? This magnificent history.
All the good stuff's being covered up. They're
Yeah.
controlled, aren't they?
Yes, and maybe it's because it would take us down the road of non-allopathic medicine.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, let's fast forward now to what they call medieval history, and I just thought it might be fun.
Let me interrupt before we do that.
Yeah.
What strikes me hugely is that we should do one subject at a time. I appreciate they're all linked, but I think that was so interesting to me. I think to a load of people. I think if we just did more complete ones, I think we have a whole series of this doing one at a time. We could do two or whatever, in one session. But I think it'd be way more powerful that way, and I think people would be addicted as they were with the Tartaria type stuff when it was really.
Well, quite. I mean, that's what I wanted to go into next, with looking at cathedrals and all sorts of other stately homes and magnificent. Sure, we can leave that for another time. Absolutely.
But I think it'd be so powerful because each subject obviously deserves, and I think it's also right that after hearing that information, I think people need to think about it rather than hitting them with the next one. I think that's something that people should be aware of.
So we could have as a takeaway on this subject that there was an enormous industry at this time in herbal substances used both for perfumes and medicines, and it was extremely profitable. And the Nabateans, who were based in modern day Jordan, and in Petra was the main city there, that was the main source of their wealth. They were the transporters of these aromatic substances. And in fact, Nabatean coins have actually been found at Qumran, which suggests to me that there was some trading going on.
Yeah.
But, you're looking at some very strange goings on, like, for example, those bottles not having been inventoried by Roland de Vaux. We're looking at a very high proportion of the coins that were inventoried having simply gone missing. And yeah, you've heard it right, the coins. Coins are so important for dating a site. And a very high proportion of the coins have literally gone missing. And that's concerning, to say the least. Is there a reason that they've gone missing, other than just being a little bit careless? Do they want to, are there concerns to disassociate this site from key historical figures of the time? All sorts of questions we could ask.
Sounds like the history of the Smithsonian.
Say more.
I was saying it sounds like the history of the Smithsonian. Everything goes.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You mean the disappearance of the giants?
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. And so, well, many of us concerned about truth in a contemporary context, but truth in a historical context, we definitely need to be doing a lot of digging in both a literal and a metaphorical sense, I think. There was a site down at the south end of the Dead Sea, Enbekek. I mentioned that's acknowledged to be a centre where these aromatic, a workshop down there got inverted commas, vandalized.
Oh,
There was a site at Greek Epidaurus, which was another Asclepian centre. I was very interested in part of that site, and a friend was going there. I asked if he could look out for it, and he said when he got there, he found it had been covered over. And that was my experience going to a part of Jericho as well, where I told you King Herod has his balsam orchards, and I managed to find from a book a kind of map of some of the installations where the balsam was being manufactured. And I went there with a friend, and we wanted to locate this area on the map. And we had a couple of local people join us in the search. And again, we couldn't find it. We had to conclude that the area was covered over. And indeed, when I got back and I went to the library where I'd got this map, I hadn't spotted a footnote, a PS, if you like. It said, "This area is now covered over." I wish I'd seen that before, because we searched for many hours in the blazing midday sun.
I mean, some of this stuff is so obvious, and some of it's absolutely not. That in the 70s, I spent 3 weeks at Baalbek in the Lebanon, and spending 3 weeks there. On day one, a couple of things were obvious to me. I felt that it was made for giants. The big buildings were made for giants because of where you could see where the staircases had been. And second, that I was looking at war damage. This hadn't fallen down over the centuries. It had been smashed up deliberately. That was my feeling.
And some people say that, well, are you suggesting that the site was targeted?
Yeah, but I think, so many of the great monuments, even to modern day times, like the Crystal Palace and so on, some of the great works have been smashed down. I think that at some point in history, I mean, I would believe the myths, the Indian myths or whatever as to what happened. I think there were some quite different races, so to speak, on the planet at that point, and I think the bad guys won.
Well, and some people say that this is one of the reasons Dresden was targeted in the Second World War.
Yeah, precisely. It's gone
Because
on.
of its magnificent buildings, which may hark back to a Tartarian past.
Yeah.
And many of the city churches, for example, after that allegedly were erected after the Great Fire of London. That's another subject we could talk about. Many of those were destroyed over time. I don't actually think they were erected after the Fire of London. I think they existed already, and then the fire allowed those buildings to be repurposed and given a new history.
Yeah, I completely agree.
But to explain that architecture is challenging if the explanation has to be kept within mainstream bounds.
I used to live in a little village called Sherrington, and there was a pretty old church there. Who knows quite how old? And I used to go in there from time to time. It was still sort of interesting. But one day I took the bother to actually read the wall paintings, and they were totally different to what I expected. What had happened was at some point when it kept changing religions, they plastered over the wall paintings. And it was only in the 1970s or something that the plaster fell off, and they realized that these intact, perfect wall paintings. And so the first one as you come in was the Lord's Prayer. And it was a different version that I'd ever read. Most of it was fairly familiar. Then it said, and Jesus went to hell. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, then he came back up again. Sherrington, Wiltshire, little church. Jesus went to hell and then ascended.
How extraordinary.
I know. And I mean, that's recent history covered up, go back a few thousand more years,
Yes.
I did for ages.
Well, we have our time cut out, don't we? There's a lot of history to be looked at and rewritten.
I'm with Gloria Moss, who's going to be holding a very, very exciting conference all about history and how perhaps it's not exactly as we've been taught, or I think Gloria might answer this, is it at all like we've been taught? So tell us about your wonderful conference.
Well, and I hope you'll be joining as a speaker, Clive.
I hope so.
It's get it in your diaries. Next March, 13th to the 15th of March. That's Friday through to Sunday. And on the Friday, we're doing something that's not been done before, which is a very good reason for doing it, which is hold an award ceremony for all the wonderful people who've put out truths in our time and before our time. And we're going to celebrate those with nominations. We'll read out these people's achievement. There'll be so much education packed in, and humour too. We've got Mark Devlin presenting and Rachel Matthews. And we've got some surprise awards that will be offered, and so there'll be great cause for merriment, I think, and celebration, and it's our equivalent of the Oscars, with, with a lot more truth in it and meaning. And then on the Saturday, and this is all under the same roof, a hotel in Slough, which is easy to get to from all parts of the country. There'll be a conference, and we'll be covering questioning history and questioning science. And we're starting with a speaker who's talking about consciousness and how it's time for us to develop our consciousness. So we move from childhood. In other words, that we start taking responsibility for the knowledge that we accept or reject. And other speakers include Mark Devlin, who's talking about predictive programming through the film industry and the music industry. Guy Anderson will focus on Tartaria and the latest reset, according to him, which was in the 18th century. With Milner, we'll talk about light therapy and the latest findings in that area. She'll bring lots of equipment as well. Clive, you're going to bring some of the equipment that you've got at your disposal. Sounds amazing. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So 20 years ago, I was enlightened that Nikola Tesla in the 1880s and the early 1890s had been developing various healing devices. And he urged me to track one down and use it. And I did, made sure it was safe, restored the wiring and so on, and started using it. And the results were incredible. I don't know of a single modern device that's as good as the Tesla devices that he gave away the plans to in 1893. He patented everything, but he wasn't going to patent this healing device. So loads of scientists started building them around the world, and they were normal. I've got textbooks, from the 1910s, 1920s, and so on, where frequency devices were normal. Guy's Hospital opened their frequency department in 1843, and people like John Wesley were healing people with electrical devices powered by Leyden jars. Before that, and you can trace it right back to Egyptian times, where they would put torpedo fish, like electric eels, in a bowl of water. And you can see on the hieroglyphs people with their feet in the bowl of water getting electroshock treatment by the fish. I think you're muted.
You'll be talking about frequency medicine and bringing chairs as well. You talked about trauma chairs
Yeah,
for relieving.
won't be bringing the electric eel type fish, by the way.
No,
That's
no, 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 no,
I'll keep that
no,
at
no,
home.
that's good to hear. We'll be thrown out of the hotel for that. But you talked about trauma chairs and
Well,
pelvic floor chairs.
exactly. I mean, to cut a long story short, we've got a chair that you sit on, the pelvic floor chair, and in 28 minutes, it delivers painlessly 20,000 pelvic floor exercises. Now, that's a lot, right? And you're going to use this machine once every 3 days. But whereas normally it might take, for instance, 4 to 6 sessions to get somebody's incontinence to end, we've had people, both men and women, who've literally sat on it for one go and years of incontinence and getting up in the night to pee or whatever it is, gone. And
Ah,
people don't know that this technology exists. It's not terribly expensive to get treatments, or we actually sell the chairs. And a lot of practitioners and so on are waking up to the fact that they're not that expensive. If they got the clients, in a week or a month, you would have paid for the whole chair, because it's not just incontinence. It can work on anything in that area, from women who've got early prolapse, you've got all the problems of just having had a child. 20,000 exercises in that part of the body are going to pretty much, fix most things that you can think of, if that's what that part of the body needs. It might be that you're not getting better because your nutrition's rubbish or something, but if it's just a physical thing, the muscles have just got incredibly lazy, for example, it's incredible. And the other chair, the trauma release chair, is equally incredible, but in a totally different way. It creates pulsed pressure waves. There are 18 of these pulsed pressure wave generators. When you lie down, it's like a folding garden chair. When you lie down and switch it on, it feels a bit like you're floating. And then, without any warning, so to speak, it stops dead. And instead of feeling floating, you suddenly find yourself gently dropping into this state of tranquility. I've had meditators who said, I've been meditating for 20 years and I've never felt this calm in 10 minutes, right? There are programs that are an hour long, but the 10-minute program is remarkable. And I've got videos where we've videoed hundreds and hundreds of people. We've got thousands of people on the chairs. We take it to big events so loads of people can try loads of chairs all at once. And the results have been just so extraordinary that most people wouldn't believe it. But if you watch the short videos where people are coming off the chair, it's just very extraordinary. We've all got trauma trapped inside us. We're all hugely traumatized just as human beings living in the modern world. And that trauma can often lead to ongoing health crises, ongoing health issues that might kill you. But resolving the trauma, you could do it with psychotherapy. But that's a horrible version, because they want you to go through it all again. That's dreadful. You could do it with hypnotherapy, which is so much more effective, because with hypnotherapy, you don't need to know what the problem was. But on a physiological level, the problem and talking about it or thinking about it are irrelevant if the good shake will shake it out of you. And so often, really quite long, I've had people been in pain for 10 years. 10 minutes later, boom, gone. It's not going to happen every time, but it's quite common if it was a trauma-based thing. I mean, I had a lady who had motor neurone disease, and that's ludicrously difficult to fix. By the time she got to a stage where she couldn't really talk and she couldn't really walk, then that's not easy to reverse. However, after she came off the chair and I treated her for maybe 4 minutes with a tester device to help her with her pain, she cried for about 10 minutes or so. And over a 15-minute period, she went from crying uncontrollably, virtually hysterical screaming, to laughing hysterically. Anyway, I had to literally hug her for about 15 minutes. And she explained to me that 14 years before, that her daughter had tragically died. 1 year later, she gets motor neurone disease. So it immediately occurred to me there must be some link, surely. As a mum, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to blame yourself. You're going to think yourself as useless, worthless, not fit to live. Who knows what a tragic situation would bring up. But let's say that the body at a subconscious level heard all of that, chastisement all day long. I'm used to it. And I think it became it. It just took on all those characteristics where you're thinking about it all the time. That must be what you want. You think and you are. So, yeah, I'm not saying it's a cure because it's your body that does that, but it can be a great tool of release. Yeah.
Yes.
And if they go onto my website, if they look up magic chair on the website, they can see the video.
But it sounds extraordinary, and it would be wonderful if you can bring some of this for people to try and possibly buy if they have good experiences. And then, in terms of other speakers, Dr. Richard Howes is asking the question in all of our minds: Can the science ever be settled? I think many of us know the answer to that, but that will be a very interesting talk, and I'll be talking about the plagues of history, horrendous events, the Black Death in the 14th century in Europe. It's estimated that may have killed about 50 million people back then. And I'll be linking what I think were the causes, not rats and fleas, to something that you may hear about in more contemporary times as well. And then I'm also will run a seminar on called The Greater Secret, which reveals some of what you may have heard in a previous episode with Clive on Qumran, and how that links to secrets of later history, secrets of the Templars, of stories such as Romeo and Juliet, Rennes-le-Château down in the south of France. We know there was a priest there who became extraordinarily wealthy overnight. It could be the same secret that unites all of these different elements. So that will be on offer on the Friday. So, and finally, on the Sunday, we'll relax, and for those who want, we'll wander off to a place Clive and I are going to talk about today, which is Basildon Park, a stately home with a very interesting history. And I won't say too much about it now, because Clive and I will talk about it in a little bit. But it's about 35 minutes from our hotel in Slough. So that would be relaxation on the Sunday afternoon. As we use critical thinking to ask whether we actually, whether we agree with the history presented to us at this place. And there'll be a prize. If you want to create your own hat, critical thinker hat, there'll be a prize for the best hat. Because this is the weapon, the tool that we all have available to us. I don't know if you'd agree, Clive, in these challenging times.
I thought
critical thinking.
I thought that was illegal.
Yes.
I'm sure it is.
Yes. So if you want to create your Sherlock Holmes hat or whatever, this is what we need. We need to practice the art of questioning everything.
Hence something. So if I could suggest, your guy is going to talk about a subject that we already know the answer to. Could he go to the next chapter, which is how we create the solutions to the problem we already know about, rather than the historical, they've been fooling us. Yeah, we know that. The solutions would be good.
Solutions, yes. Well, the solutions, that's what we talk about in the time that we have together. And the award ceremony points the way, that we need to celebrate the truths and build on those truths, would you say, and create new of everything: new health system, new education system, new justice system. Have I forgotten anything?
Well, the good thing is all those subjects and more have already been worked out decades ago we talk about that one day, what the solutions are, because from my naive perspective, I see the solutions as dead simple and dead obvious if people knew them. So I'd love to talk about that because I've been going to conferences probably like you have for ages, and you know, 35 years ago, I heard Vandana Shiva speak, and wow, and she's not saying too much different now than she was back then, and so all the answers are there. It's just people just need to be aware that government is not part of it in any way, shape, or
Well, quite. And I don't know if you see it like I do, but I think we're living in the new world. Some people talk about the new world order, but there was an old world order. I'd quite like to see us return to some of the values that were created by the old world order.
I mean, I like the idea that 2 words, if redefined, would change everything. Let's say that the government have gone on holiday, we don't allow them back. So now they're just gone, full stop. So we say to the public servants, we give them a little thing, which is like an online dictionary for 2 words. The first word is the true definition of public, and the second is the true definition of servant. Imagine that all the public servants now, their whole job is to do nice things for you. The parking wardens don't have to be fired. They can help you park. They can help. The planners, they don't have to be fired. They can help you plan. Help you do what you want to do, not what the government wants. I mean, if we could redefine those 2 words, there'd be, people wouldn't have their money stolen because we'd be creating debt-free money. So everybody get more money. We could say to the public servants or the army, we're going to stop war. We're going to pay you double not to do it. You can do whatever you like. Help your environment, help your friends, help your family, plant food. But we're going to pay you not to do silly stuff. Same with the police. What would you rather be? Somebody who's actually not very well respected in society, or somebody who's loved, like the old-fashioned idea of the Bobby, help the streets. Anyway, that's what I think about. That can happen overnight, because everybody, I think, except for the psychopaths, would be happier with that situation, I think.
Well, absolutely. And not allowing those psychopaths to occupy those positions would be an important part of the solutions, and having a system that identifies them and excludes them from public office.
100%.
And that's not beyond the wit of man to do that.
No, it's easy. There's nothing wrong with Parliament, but you just can't let a politician in there or a psychopath.
Yes, lovely building.
Yeah, lovely building. People can have a nice chat. Not have to scream at each other and like children. I mean, it's just, it's lovely. I find the whole situation hilarious. But, there are genocides going on, and it seems like nobody's noticed. Here in the States, one of the people who lives here is from Pakistan, a Muslim. And I said, how many of the average Americans are aware that there's a genocide going on? She said less than 5%. She was, her mouth dropped open when I used the word genocide, because that is not discussed here, according to her. I mean, really? Yeah.
Really?
But
it's still the American dream, is it, in America? Not the American nightmare.
Well, for a lot of people, it is the American nightmare. I mean, there's people who live in this area, their children could never afford to live here, just like almost everywhere else in the world. A friend of mine is currently here. I don't know how legal it is. And I said to him, look, leave, come back in a dinghy. They'll give you everything you haven't got now. Yes. And you heard about the immigrant who decided he loved England so much because of all the free stuff and the free hotel and stuff, that he decided he'd do everything he can to be a British citizen because he so admired Britain. He becomes a British citizen after a lot of struggle. They take away everything, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
He's out on the street.
Yeah,
The dream.
yeah. It seems yes that coming in on dinghy you've won the secret ticket, haven't you? Then.
Well, exactly, and they
Um,
couldn't possibly stop it. There'd be no way that you could stop boats arriving and people checking into hotels you booked them into. You wouldn't know who they were, would you?
mm,
Anyway, let's do episode 2.
yeah, that's great. And so, if anybody's interested in this event conference, can I just put out an email if anybody wants to contact and get details?
Well, because I'm mentioning, I completely forgot the title of it, and I didn't want to say it at the beginning, but remind you only just told me 5 seconds before we started what the
Yeah,
title.
no,
Go
that's
for it
absolutely
again.
fine. So it's the email is learningholidays@protonmail.com. I think this must be our 8th or 9th by now. We've been at this hotel before. They bend over backwards to please. So it's learningholidays@protonmail.com. So what are we going to talk about today? Apart from that, we're going to continue questioning history, I think, today. And
Well,
the first task is to upload some pictures.
absolutely.
So my last chat with Clive, we looked at the biblical site of Qumran by the Dead Sea. And now we're whizzing forward well, who's to say where we're whizzing forward to? Because how much of history can we actually believe? They call it the medieval period. So let's stick with the term that they give us. And we're going to look at some very fine buildings called cathedrals from the medieval period. And I want to begin here with Bourges in France. Magnificent, as you can see in this image. Let me just blow it up for you. There we go. And note with this cathedral, Christian building, that the horizontal part of the building, which would give it a cross shape, which you'd normally find in an ecclesiastical building, is actually missing. So all sorts of questions might come into your mind. Was this really a place of worship, or did it have some other possible function? That would be something else we could talk about another time. The fact that what we know as cathedrals may have actually been energy devices for attracting healing frequencies into these magnificent buildings. I won't go into that today, but just notice the lack of a horizontal part of the cross shape. And also note that the name of the builder of this awesome building is unknown. Is that not rather strange that we don't know the name? Let's move on swiftly to another extraordinary building in France, the cathedral not far from Paris of Saint-Denis. Allegedly, this was the creation of the abbot, Abbot Suger, which is spelt like sugar but with an E instead of the A. Now, he, holy man that he was, he's said to have built the west and eastern ends of this cathedral in 1140. So not only was he a holy man, but also a man of super extraordinary talent. And what we're looking at here is the astonishingly complex chevet, Chevet, which consists of the canopy of vaults at the eastern end of the church around the altar that you can see there. Now, how many years do you think it would take to construct this very complex chevet?
Before you answer that, can I ask you a question?
Mm,
My sense of logic, having been very aware that giants existed up until very recently, was if I was a giant, I might have a giant brain. Let's say I was super clever and I could reach really tall. But I was so tall I needed a big building, and you want to make the building as pretty as possible with lots of light and so on. Do you think that they were if they could have had inhabitants, they could have been giants? So do you favor the frequency element as more likely, or both at the same time?
I think it's very likely, and we're going to look at some doorways in a little bit, which I think will answer the question for many of us. So going back to the question, how many years do you think, Clive, it took to build this intricate?
Not nearly enough to justify the truth of the matter, or it was built in ways that we don't understand. Like, I mean, clearly they had incredible
Yes.
technology, like the impossible sculptures being a great example of how did they do that? And
how quite
can
well
I ask,
official.
can I ask you
Yeah,
one
sorry.
question? Last time I went to Salisbury Cathedral, I was talking to one of the people who runs it out there, and they reminded me that it has no foundations whatsoever. Yet it's remained absolutely straight and horizontal forever, but it's built on a floodplain. I wondered whether you knew whether these great buildings were also built without foundations.
I wasn't aware that it was built without foundations. That's extremely interesting. No, I didn't know about that. But if you look at the history books and this church of Saint Denis, they would have you believe that the whole edifice was constructed in a matter of 4 years, from 1140 till 1144. Although the abbot Suger himself, he claimed it took him only 3 years and 3 months.
Wow.
It's time, I think, that we asked serious questions about the history books.
Quite.
And incidentally, there is no surviving contract for any cathedral from medieval times. They just went up. There are no designs, there are no floor plans. They just appeared. Let's move.
How old do you think they really are, roughly? What, 2,000, 4,000? How old are they?
I don't know. I suspect. You see, I'm in a rather confused place at the moment. Maybe we could talk about this towards the end.
Yeah.
If we don't believe the official chronologies, how much of official history has to go?
I think they tried to destroy all of the buildings, but they missed a few, or they couldn't bear to destroy them. Don't know. St. Paul's.
Yes.
Big enough target to have bombed easily. It really wanted to.
Absolutely. Let's cross the channel now and go to Rochester Cathedral. Very fine building, not dissimilar in style to the other ones we looked at. Let's look at the official history. What does it tell us about Rochester Cathedral? Well, I'm reading from an older book by Smith, 1943. This is what Smith says. The architectural plan of the Church of Rochester was entirely rebuilt by Gundulf with the financial assistance of Lanfranc and closely resembled that of Canterbury. So, pride of place in terms of the creation of Rochester Cathedral is given to Gundulf. Now, if you haven't read about Gundulf before, now is the moment to hear about him. He was the, quotes, saintly prelate, this is from the same book by Smith, who remained aloof from the confused political turmoil of the times. So aloof was he that he celebrated Mass twice daily, So a lot of his time must have been engaged in church affairs, I would have thought. And another commentator describes Gundulf as a moving force in several late 11th century English building projects. So not only was he very spiritual, celebrating Mass twice daily, but he was also heavily involved in building projects, so we are told. Now, our main source in all of this is the life of Gundulf, so-called Vita Gundulfi, the life of Gundulf, written by a monk of Rochester who apparently knew Gundulf very well. And this life of Gundulf naturally emphasizes his monastic vocation and holiness, and contains the requisite hagiographical criteria that mark the lives of saintly men. Now the question is, could a man who celebrated Mass twice daily, A, have had the time to construct Rochester Cathedral, and B, have had the skills? While you're mulling that over, you might be interested to know that he's also credited with being the creator of another very fine building, and here it is. This is in London, the White Tower, by the Tower of London. Yep, the same man, based in Rochester, Kent, is alleged to have been the architect of the White Tower. And if you think that's worthy of question, then you're in good company, because the medieval historian C.N.L. Brooke, that's Brooke with an E at the end, he wrote extensively about 12th century history. He commented on Gundulf's alleged role in building the White Tower and admits, here's his quote, that this saintly monk seems to us a strange choice for such a job. Any reactions, Clive? Is this the work of a saintly monk, Gundulf?
It's somewhat unlikely, as you pointed out. I mean, it's incredible how people swallow this stuff. How do they believe it?
Well, yeah, I wonder how somebody could have travelled on a regular basis back then between Rochester and London. Just the business of travel. How could that have been done on a frequent basis when you're celebrating Mass twice daily?
Well, quite. I mean, EasyJet wasn't around. I mean, Easy Donkey sounds
Yes,
quite a while.
yes. Yes, so what are we to do with this history? Let's move on swiftly to another country. We're in Italy now, and we're I think you said you visited
I have.
the
It was one of the most
remarkable
absolutely
Duomo.
remarkable. Anybody who goes needs to go up on the roof, because when you're on the roof, you have these incredible statues looking down at you. It's absolutely incredible. Amazing.
And well, we're told that building of the Duomo Milan started at the end of the 14th century. And would you believe it? The name of the architect of this magnificent building is unknown. Oh, what can I say? Move on swiftly, I think. Let's look at some doors, because you asked an interesting question earlier, Clive, about the type of people who may have been around these buildings. Should we look at some doors,
Well,
which
yes.
may provide some answers?
I found the whole thing about doors just to be stunning. So yeah, please do go on.
Okay. Here are pictures with today's sized people standing against the doors. What's the relative height of that lady, would you say, compared to the door? Is she a quarter the size of the door? A fifth? somewhere between the two. She's certainly substantially shorter than those doors. Would you construct doors of that height for humans that are a quarter or a fifth of the height of the door? Would you actually do that? I don't think you would you? Well, let's move on to some other doors. Here's the Pantheon in Rome. Here's St. John Lateran in Rome. Well, that figure, which I think is a man, is it? Would you say?
Very small person, that's for sure.
His height relative to those doors must be about a tenth size.
Yeah.
Tenth the height. And it's very interesting because the Italian artist, well, who knows what we can believe about who did what, but Canaletto is responsible for the painting on the left of the building on the right. So what we see on the right there is the actual building, and what we see on the left is Canaletto's 18th century painting. You can see the Colosseum behind of St. John Lateran, Rome. And the red that you can see in both denotes the height of the figures on the left, are the figures in the painting itself, and on the right denotes the height transposed to the paint to the actual building on the right. So I'm not sure if I'm expressing myself particularly clearly. On the left, the painting, the figures are the height of the red, the second red line, the highest of the red lines. If you move that line across to the right, you can see some people, can't you, standing in front of this building.
Yeah, no.
Their height relative to the height of those in the Canaletto painting is, would you say, about a quarter the height?
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
And so perhaps this is part way to providing an answer to your earlier question, Clive. Could the people who have built these edifices and used them, could they have been, did you say, giants?
Yeah.
Moving on to the other side of the Atlantic, another door. The man standing there is about a tenth or even less the height of that door.
That's crazy.
Yeah. This is the Lincoln Memorial. Abraham Lincoln himself was a very tall man. But look at the height of those pillars compared to the people standing alongside them.
Well, with Abraham Lincoln, you have to take into account his hat.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
With Abraham Lincoln, he wore tall hats. That was obviously the reason they had to do 100-foot doors.
Uh-huh.
We mentioned earlier about the Picasso Museum in Malaga, which is based in a very old building, and the door knocker is roughly, it gets 16, 18 foot high. You know, why would you put a door knocker where nobody could reach it? And it's still there. You know, look at any picture of the doors of the Malaga Picasso Museum, and you'll see it. You know, they're not hiding it. It's right there to see. You know, inexplicable.
Yes. Well, quite. And looking at the Lincoln Memorial building here, would you really build something as tall as that for humans of the height that we see in the painting, which is us regular humans? Would you actually do that? I don't think you would. Why would you expend all that effort? And you know, imagine heating this building in the colder months of the year. All sorts of unnecessary labor if the people at the time it was built were the height of regular human beings. Now we're going to look at a station in America. Those aren't flies, those are humans walking around. And their height relative to that entryway well, that's a 20th of the height, would you say, of that archway?
Something like that. I mean, what you're about to show is one of the most beautiful buildings. It's incredible.
Outstandingly beautiful. The old world order celebrated beauty, and I've done quite a lot of research in my time on design and graphic expression, and there's a way of thinking that suggests that the graphic expression people create is a bit like an X-ray. It's a mirror image of the person, the man or woman, boy or girl, who has created it. So think handwriting analysis. I came across a man who was an art therapist who was employed in a prison to analyze the drawings of inmates with a view to determining if they were ready for therapy, group therapy or not. And he made his judgments purely on the basis of the drawings that the inmates had created. I included a chapter by him. It was extraordinary work he undertook in a book that I edited called, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of this book. Let me just refresh my memory. I don't know if you can see it, probably can't. It's called Personality Design and Marketing. And there's some fascinating chapters in this book, including by this art therapist whose name was Bill Wiley, Wylie. And there's another chapter in this book written by a professor in America, and she describes her attempts to infer the personality of the creators of digital art. And she was extraordinarily successful in her personality assessments. So what I'm trying to say is if you can infer personality from drawings, you can certainly infer personality from buildings. So what sort of personality would have created the beauty of these old world buildings that celebrated high aesthetic values? Well, that round shape, it's widely believed that round shapes rather than angular shapes betoken kindness, givingness, generosity. I can't see any angular shapes in this image. Can you, Clive?
No, interesting. Yeah.
And so it is with many other old buildings. So I think you can read them like a book. You can actually infer the personality of the world that created these buildings. And consider modern buildings. They're typically very different from this. They're box-like, rectangular, square, everything straight lines. That's a completely different personality.
And if they come with windows, you can barely open them.
Well, yes, absolutely. I'll comment on that a bit later. Now, we're talking about size here, size of buildings, I hasten to add. I've collected some photos that I thought were pretty extraordinary. Here's one of a violin, not a double bass even. Here's one of boots with a man standing next to them. Who wore these? And here's a book. It's called the Codex Gigas, if that's the right pronunciation. And you can see the dimensions there and the weight. Extraordinary. It's the largest known manuscript in the world. Imagine, well, would that have been read on somebody's lap, do you think, or on a table? Either way, it would be challenging for somebody of our size to read a book like that.
What sort of things are in the book?
I I don't know. That's a good question. I have to look into that. Subject for our next chat. We'll go back to the Codex Gigas. I suspect it's historical because it says the last entry in this book is dated to 1222. Anyway, so we've looked at cathedrals. I thought we'd move on now, and we could spend another conversation just looking at stately homes, whether in Britain, France, think Versailles, or Italy. I've just got one here, simply because this is the one that we'll be visiting in the Questioning History, Questioning Science event next March, because it's about 35 minutes from the place that we're staying at. And this is at Basildon Park. And you can see it's an enormous building. Interesting that originally it only had one bathroom for the whole house. And that's nothing unusual, as many of you listening may know, with these grand stately homes. I believe Versailles in France suffered from terrible, terrible sanitation because they had no toilets. But maybe the people who lived, or maybe the people who suffered the poor sanitation were, how can we put it, were later inhabitants of Versailles, and that the original inhabitants, I've heard people mention this possibility, that the original creators and inhabitants were breatharians, that these are people who didn't need to eat, and so forth, that they didn't need to have a toilet. But anyway, here's Basildon Park. And who is the genius behind this building? And this time we do have a name. And the name that we're given is John Carr, C-A-R-R. This is what we learn about John Carr. He trained as a stonemason under his mason father. More than 60 bridges were built or altered by him. No fewer than 11 churches, 20 public buildings, which include the magnificent Buxton Crescent. I don't know if you've seen that, Clive, up in Buxton.
Oh, yes,
I'm going to show you a photo in a minute, so it doesn't matter too much if you haven't seen it. So 20 major public buildings. Now that you might think is already a lot, but on top of all of that, he is credited with creating 119 domestic buildings. I'll just name a few in case people listening know any of these. Lytham Hall in Lancashire, Denton Hall in North Yorkshire, Tabley House, Cheshire. A lot of his work, this is an exception, Basildon Park, were focused in the northern part of Britain. The Staples at Castle Howard. Castle Howard is another extraordinary building, credited as being the creation of a playwright, Vanbrugh. And this chap, John Carr, is credited with producing the stables there. Well, can we believe that all of this is the work of one man, John Carr, who trained as a stonemason? Let me just show you. Oh no, I don't have a picture. I thought I had put it here. My apologies. I haven't put in a picture of the crescent at Buxton. Perhaps you could look that one up. It's an extraordinary building. I've been inside it with a group. We visited Buxton. I think the design history of Buxton, I gave a talk in Buxton on this subject. It really needs to come with a lot of questions, the design history of this magnificent city of Buxton. Perhaps these buildings like the cathedrals cannot be dated to any particular period within our official chronology. And perhaps a decision was made, assuming that these buildings were the work of the old world order, as I call it. Maybe a decision was made to repurpose these buildings as being the creation of later people, such as John Carr. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Carr. Clive. I don't know why I said Carr. Because it's your surname. Yeah.
Exactly. I completely agree. I've been very lucky. My stepfather was the curator of Kenwood House on Hampstead Heath in London. So I learned quite a lot about old houses. A friend of mine owned a stately home which had supposedly a capability brown garden, and exceptional. And just, but why? Why would you have 60 bedrooms or whatever it was? Why would you have that many bedrooms, do you think?
Yes. And a lot of these buildings are very elongated. You can't see the full extent on this photograph. But if you think of a building like Versailles or Castle Howard, they're very, very elongated. And I wonder if people, because the weather isn't always that wonderful, if people actually lived inside the buildings rather than outside for a lot of the time. They perambulated in the famous Hall of Mirrors, for example, at Versailles. Did they escape the bad weather by living indoors? We can only guess at why they had so many rooms.
No.
And these very extended facades. So we're told that dates to the 18th century, this Basildon Park. But who knows? How do we know? Clive, you can say.
My mind got distracted. Trying to think of the name of the artist who drew lots of the ruins in Rome, something like Veronese or Piranesi. You've seen his drawings, have you?
I can't bring them to mind.
But it really was picking out. So Piranesi, Italian artist, drew, whatever period he really was, but he drew very, very accurate drawings of crumbling temples and stuff, just row after row after row of it. If we believe that as they were at that point, as he saw them, and you could see the ivy had been growing for a long time and trees were coming through, but totally different to what's left now. Yeah. Piranesi, yeah. Love him.
So history is confusing, to say the least. So we've looked today at the so-called medieval period, and then we moved on, didn't we, to enormous doors, and then now Basildon Park, 18th century. Let's move on in time now to the era of the Garden City. And I've been looking into this recently and find the history rather intriguing. The whole concept of the Garden City is laid at the door of a man called Ebenezer Howard. Lovely name, isn't it? Who allegedly wrote a book about garden cities. And strange that a man such as him should write this book, because he was a stenographer. He became a court clerk, taking down the proceedings in court, which doesn't immediately suggest somebody of the creativity needed to create the concept of a garden city. So I'm just going to show you some buildings from one garden city. I mean, there was a garden city set up in York, and then Letchworth Garden City, and then there's one in London, Hampstead Garden Suburb, which is very close to the Kenwood house that you mentioned just then, Clive. And I'm going to show you this building, which is a church. It's one of two churches in the central square it's called the Central Square at Hampstead Garden Suburb. And I don't think this photo really does justice to this building. It's very large. This is a side view rather than a front view. It's a very, very magnificent building. You can see a better photograph in the Substack that we've started. It's called Truth Reports. Please do visit this Substack. It's free of charge. Truthreports.substack.com. And one of the articles there describes the history, if you like, of garden cities, including this church, St Jude on the Hill, which is, as I say, Central Square, Hampstead Garden Suburb. And according to official history, the foundation stone was laid in 1910, April of that year, 1910. So we're coming up to the modern day. The Lady Chapel in this church was already in use the same year, 28th of October. So that's just, 6 months after the foundation stone was laid. And the whole church was consecrated in May 1911, which is the following year. And yeah, these facts come from the church's own website. What can one say? The whole thing was completed by 1913, having been started in 1910. 3 years is what the history of the church is telling us was what it took to create this edifice. Any thoughts on that? Does it look like the work of 3 years?
I don't think I'm getting an impression really of the size of it. I have seen it in real life because I used to be new friends.
Yeah, it's not a good photo. I apologise. All the other photos I came across were not copyright free. So this is the reason I use this one. But it is very, very substantial, this church. Let's look at another building from the same area, the same garden city, Hampstead Garden Suburb. This is residential. It's called Waterlow Court, as you can see. You have to imagine that there are wings on the right and the left that extend towards you, if you follow my gist. So it's a very large building. And we're told it was the work of Bailey Scott and was started in 1904 and completed in a matter of 4 years.
Right.
And so we could go on. Now, I came across a very interesting reference in the online museum that you can find about this area, Hampstead Garden Suburb, to the original inhabitants of the area. And they were described, the men and the women, as being distinct. The men were described as having long hair and flowing beards, wearing sandals and long cloaks. And the women, for their part, were described as having their hair in braids and wearing smocks. And, well, if you look at the article on the Substack there, the Truth Report Substack, if you look at that article, you can find photos, images of Tartarian people Tartaria is the name given for the old world order, and responsible, many say, for many of these magnificent buildings. And I came across images of two people, a man and a woman, who were allegedly Tartarian. And guess what? The man was wearing a long cloak, and the woman had her hair in long braids and was wearing a smock. Could it be that Tartarian architecture evolved over time? And what we now know as arts and crafts architecture was actually an emanation of the old world order. It's, I'm just throwing out a question.
Yeah.
Not least because of the extraordinary chronologies that are provided for these rather vast buildings.
And the arts and crafts movement were really at the end of beautiful architecture, sort of went downhill pretty much after Lyons and all those.
Oh. And you can read more in the Substack there. And I think what I'm trying to do here is simply question history. We don't always have answers, do we?
No.
But we can spot anomalies in the official narratives.
Why?
One thing that seemed clear was that the establishment of all three garden cities, whether in York, Letchworth, or Hampstead Garden Suburb, was accompanied by the establishment of trusts in each of those three places. And these trusts allowed the buildings to be monetized in some way.
So what does that mean exactly?
Well, I don't know. I'm purely asking questions. Could it be that the buildings were already in existence? Are we to believe the extraordinary speed with which the buildings were allegedly constructed? Could they have existed already? And could the establishment of the Garden City, inverted commas, have simply been a legal maneuver to put a descriptor to what was already there? I don't know. But I do think we have to ask questions and not simply accept the facts as presented to us. And in the article, you'd also learn about Lutyens, the famous British architect Lutyens, who is credited with having created the church that you saw here, the St Jude on the Hill church, and credited also with creating the second church on Central Square and the magnificent building, which you can see a photo of in the article, that sits astride these two churches. And all three are attributed to Lutyens. And when you look up the history of Lutyens, who's often described as the finest architect of Britain in the 19th, 20th century, what do you find? You find he didn't go to school because he suffered from rheumatic fever. And then he spent 3 years in art college. And from that, he developed the skills to create these buildings. And the palace in Delhi, the Viceroy Palace in Delhi.
I've always been rather interested in arts and crafts. I find it very beautiful. That church, from what I remember, what I can see, doesn't look very Lutyens style, as is. I can't see any arts and crafts in there. But, yeah.
Well, what it does have is variegated brick work, different colours of brick. And one of the things they say about Tartarian architecture is that it's distinguished by the use of brick, and that the brick was being used in some way to harness energy from the sky. I do apologise for the poor quality. It really doesn't give you a sense of the enormity of this building, the size. and the magnificence of this building. Do look at this truth reports to get a better feel. And the other church that's sitting on Central Square is also very large. It's called the Free Church, and both churches are allegedly the work of Lutyens. And when he was working on the building in Delhi, starting in 1912, he is alleged to have gone back and forth between India and England every year for 20 years. From 1912.
Is it his building, the railway station in Delhi, that can withstand 3 foot of snow? And it's never snowed in Delhi ever. British regulations.
Sorry, say that again, Clive.
There's a building, I think it's the railway station in Delhi, that was designed by an English architect. I don't know if there was Lutyens or not, but because of English regulations.
I'll look into that. I don't know. No, I'm thinking of the Viceroy Palace, which is extraordinarily large. I haven't put it in this presentation, but as I say, you can find it in the Truth Reports .substack. So what can we do when records have disappeared? There are no architectural plans for these buildings. What can we do to establish the veracity of history other than use common sense, I suppose, and critical thinking?
I seem to remember that there are architectural drawings that supposedly Lutyens did. I'm pretty sure I've seen in the books pictures of the layouts.
Well, I've seen some of those, and there's one on the Wikipedia page for his entry for him, and I noticed that the writing of the description of the different rooms was rather strange, and some of the spellings looked Americanized on those plans, and some of the words were split in unusual ways. So I'd encourage people to look on the Wikipedia page for Lutyens and see those plans and ask yourself whether you think these are original to him or they could have been, I hesitate to mention it, the work of well, I really hesitate to mention it. But AI is what I was going to say.
Right, okay. With my dad's house,
because of the strange spellings. Sorry.
My dad, funnily enough, lived in Marcy Prof's house by an architect much less known, called Voisey. And there are photographs from 1850 or whatever when I can't remember exactly when it was built. At the time, it was so ahead of its time, it was considered ultra-modern. You look at it now and you wouldn't think it was ultra-modern. At the time, it was shocking. And it was originally commissioned by Horniman, the team manufacturers at Hunting Lodge. And there are all the photographs of that one. I wonder with Lutyens or whoever, where actually there might be contemporary photographs with some sort of proof that there is a continuous history. I wonder.
We wonder, it's all we can do. And one of the reasons I suppose I'm emboldened to ask these questions about these big names is because of some of the research I did on Sir Christopher Wren.
Right.
And I discovered that he hadn't any architectural training. He was an astronomer and a mathematician, and he did go on an extended trip to Paris, bringing back, in quotes, according to a letter he wrote his son, all Paris on paper. But he wasn't trained as an architect. And St. Paul's Cathedral, for which he's taken the credit, they got a grant a few years ago to employ an archivist to look through all the drawings that they'd amassed and then distinguish between the different artists who were responsible for these drawings. And their conclusion was that Wren's hand was unlikely to be responsible for more than 10% of the drawings at St. Paul's Cathedral. Well, that's a bit of a shock in itself to learn that. I did request sight of his drawings, and I have to say that some of the drawings are extraordinarily rudimentary, much more so than the drawings of the other draftsmen, such as Hawksmoor, for example.
When I was at school, I was offered all the jobs you can think of. This is what you could be doing. And one of the ones I took fairly seriously was architecture. And I didn't go into it for only one reason. I thought you needed to be able to draw and do basic math. No, that's what the building engineers do. You can be an architect with zero qualifications, zero training, but you can still be an architect. Your drawing skills could be crap. That's how it is. I didn't realize that then.
So where does that leave you in when you contemplate these buildings?
The Kenwood House is attributed to John Adam, but I'm sure a lot more confused than you, because I have no idea. If I look at it with the eyes that say these buildings are much older, then that conclusion is obvious. But how old by who, I don't know. But some of them are quite well built. A friend of mine who used to be, he's passed away now, but he used to be a Tory MP for a while when Macmillan was around. He inherited this stately home, and asked him one day, when did you last have to repair the roof? And he said, it's never been repaired in well over 100 years. There's never been any requirement to do that at all. Pretty well built.
Very, very well built, yeah. This is taken from, I'll show you, this book on the left. Truth University Press has published these books, one of which is The Dark Side of Academia, How Truth is Suppressed. And on page 109 of this book, you can read about two of the buildings in Oxford and Cambridge that Wren is attributed with having created. One is the Pembroke College Chapel in Cambridge, and an article by Peter Meadows in 1994 states, and I quote, that there are no drawings in Wren's hands, in Wren's hand, I beg your pardon, no letters and no building accounts. Extraordinary. He goes on to refer. Pembroke, Wren got this commission to design, allegedly, we have to use that word very often, that word allegedly. He designed Pembroke College Chapel as a result of a commission from his uncle, the Bishop of Ely. I think this is called nepotism. That's how allegedly he got the commission to design Pembroke College Chapel. And just to repeat what I said, Peter Meadows, I think, who was a member of the college, Pembroke College, in 1994 states that there are no drawings in Wren's hands, no letters, and no building accounts. And he goes on to refer to a drawing that's preserved among the chapel papers that is, quotes, awkward in execution. So it appears that there's no definitive evidence that Wren was actually responsible for the resulting design. And then if you go to the Sheldonian Theatre, which is where graduation ceremonies take place in the University of Oxford. And I attended a family member's graduation there, and I heard the person presiding telling the assembled audience that this magnificent building was the work of Christopher Wren. Once again, it seems it's impossible to assert with any confidence the exact part played by Christopher Wren in the creation of the Sheldonian Theatre. For example, a model of the theatre, shown in the Royal Society, was made by the Oxford mason Mr. Bird, and is said to have been made to Wren's specifications, but no evidence is cited for that allegation. And so it goes on. This is page 110 of the book on the left. And the book on the right, which I co-authored with Catherine Armitage, is on the importance of critical thinking. And really, I suppose our conversation today and our previous one is an exercise in critical thinking. Einstein said, question everything. And I guess that's to a great extent what we're doing here.
Yeah, indeed.
And so these books are published by Truth University. And there's an email at the bottom if anybody's interested in contacting them. So lots of questions. More questions than answers, really, I think.
Yes.
And when we look at Basildon Park, I know it's not a terribly clear picture there, but I think we can see balustrades. Can you spot those?
Yeah.
And that's a distinguishing feature I've noticed on so many of these I call them old world buildings. There. If you go to Cliveden House, for example, which is one of these old world buildings, they're ubiquitous. It's something to look out for. So I feel that whoever created these buildings, they weren't necessarily the work of different people following a stylistic model. There's so much more work to be done, essentially. So many more questions to be asked of architectural history. We've just put our toe in the water today, really.
Can I ask you, what do you think is the reason behind the sort of bowl-like structures on quite a lot of the old world buildings? There might be on the corners, or might be several around them. We talk about red mercury and stuff like that they contain some power-attracting material.
Sorry, the which structures?
On the top of many buildings, the old ones, you tend to get what look a bit like flower pots that are actually globular, with a little bit of pointy bit sticking at the end. Do you know what I'm talking about? It doesn't matter. Another time, I'll ask you this.
Another time. Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of copper on the top of buildings, and many commentators who talk about the old world suggest that those are energy devices.
Yeah.
To bring energy in, and that a lot of these enormous properties were heated not through the burning of wood or coal, but through a system of conveying the energy through what we call fireplaces, but which weren't necessarily using fire as the source of the heat in the winter or the cooler air in the summer.
Yeah.
So I don't know if what you're picturing, we'd have to have a look at what you're thinking of, Clive, but whether it's got
I'm convinced
the signature copper.
Sorry, the delay. I end up talking over you. I'm sorry about that.
Yes.
I'm convinced that what I'm talking about are part of a free energy system. Exactly that.
And I was talking earlier about how you can infer personality from graphic expression or buildings. And so if we look at this building and the world in which it was placed, with antennae reaching up into the ether to bring down energy, this was, would you say, an era not categorized by exploitation with a view to making money. It was an era where resources were freely distributed and shared. So very, very different personality behind that civilization from what you might infer about the New World, not. So resources freely shared in the past compared with resources not freely shared in the present.
I mean, a good example is the price of gold. When gold was over $20, $30 an ounce for 100 years in the States, the price of gold never went up. Then the bankers took over and printed money as debt. And now, today, $30 worth of gold will be worth whatever it is, I don't know, $4,000. But the gold will buy you exactly the same bunch of goods that it would have brought you originally. The gold has stayed static. It's just that it's valued our money, so we don't have any anymore.
Yes. And there are some who say, and I can't vouch for this, that gas and electricity, that the companies who are selling it are simply credit brokers. They're not actually producing the gas and electricity, and so it should be available free of charge.
Yeah.
But it's just something I've heard. Yeah.
If you've got a contract with an electricity company, you should say, send me an invoice. They send you a bill. If you ask them to send you an invoice, they actually, apparently it's difficult to do, but it's a civil thing. A lot of people obviously are not paying council tax or electricity bills or what have you right now because they've got a choice of eating or paying a bill. I mean, we're told that oil is a fossil fuel and we're burning it all up. There's every proof to say that oil is regenerative and the wells that are empty are now full. And we've got so much oil under the North Sea, but apparently we can't use it because we've got to save the planet.
Yes. And I've heard that the term fossil fuel is very misleading, that oil is infinitely abundant and doesn't derive from fossils.
Well, quite. I mean, there are liquids that are flowing underground rivers.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oil is just one of the many wonderful materials that the planet produces. And if we need it once, well, we run out for a while. But, abundance has always been here, but then people said things like, the love of money is the root of all evil. But the reality is, the root of all evil is the lack of money. Because that money is abundance. And because we're deprived of money, that is the evil thing that keeps us all enslaved. Which comes to the idea of the most evil thing on the planet is usury. If that wasn't there, governments couldn't exist, wars wouldn't happen. Usury. I used to think the governments were the worst thing in the world, but actually usury is the base of how they do it. Without usury, it wouldn't happen. But what was the only time when Jesus got pissed off, when he kicked the moneylenders out of the temple for being usurers, charging debt, charging interest?
And I was part of a group that visited the Templar Church in London, and the master was asked whether what happened if people didn't repay the debt, and the answer was that I believe that if it wasn't repaid in full by a certain date, then the person would be expected to pay 100% on top of the original amount owned.
Wow. Sounds fair.
So, as you say, the world would be a very different place if money was more freely available
It's,
without those kind of punitive terms.
it's happened before for around 100 years. In America, they had basically interest-free money, so they could do everything they needed from an infrastructure point of view, so creating value, not debt. And in 1914, you know about the Bradbury Pound just before World War.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it's becoming
Sorry.
they could rescue the economy tomorrow morning.
Yeah. And in Guernsey, I believe, they also issued their own money to fund public work. And it was very, very beneficial to the local economy. So this experiment has definitely worked on the occasions when it's been used.
So
It's worked very effectively.
there's one way to look at what's going on right now. If, a bit like Shakespeare might have said, we're all players, let's say it's all theatre. Who is waking more people up than anybody else in England? I would say that it's Keir Starmer. That as a speaker of Keir Starmer, everybody should go up and give him a hug. You're waking up more people than anybody else in the country. You're a hero.
Yes. It's a good way of looking at it.
Well,
Yes.
if we're actually all one and there's nothing wrong, got to have a bit of black and white and make it a positive on it.
Yes.
Um,
It's very interesting. Yeah.
well, thank you, Gloria. That's fascinating. I'd love to talk to you about some of these buildings for hours and hours and hours, but I think it's given people a chance to reconsider perhaps a little more once again about believing what we're told. I mean, isn't it almost always the opposite of what they taught us at school, what they tell us? Just inversion.
Uh, it could well be. And as I say, we can't always find the answers, but I think the trick is to find the anomalies
Yeah.
and then see where those anomalies direct us. And sometimes those anomalies direct us to question what we're told, even if, as I say, we can't always find the answer.